I'm Madelyn Blair. On today's show, we'll be talking about resistance stories with David Hutchens. I hope you caught that word, resistance. We'll talk about why we chose that word and what it might mean to you today. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about unlocking the resilient leader in you. We all experience disruptions in our work. We all are witnesses to events that hurt our hearts. And we all have moments that call for digging deep and finding our courage. Our stories capture these moments so that others can understand our experience and better understand themselves when they meet such times. Today, we'd like to refer to these moments as moments that call for resistance. But before we dig into its deeper meanings, let's hear from our sponsor. Since the 1800s, Smith Island cakes have been a symbol of family, faith, and community. In 2009, the Smith Island Baking Company was created as the custodian of this treasure, shipping hundreds of thousands of cakes made from scratch, packed with care, and delivered to celebrations of all sizes and shapes, far and wide. Today, people just like you celebrate important occasions with a cake. When is your next birthday? Welcome back. You're listening to Unlocked. I'm your host, Madelyn Blair, and we're talking about resistance stories. You know, the word resistance ultimately comes from the Latin re, meaning back again or against, and sustere, meaning to stand firm, to stay put. So to resist something, you are standing firm against something that you find is not generative to you or your life. When I looked up the formal meaning of the word, additional insights became clear, and the one I loved was the one we speak of, the inherent ability of an organism to resist harmful influences. For example, she seems to have a natural resistance to the common cold. Boy, I wish we all had that. From this, I was able to see that based on our three examples, we become resistant to disappointment or frustration when our work is interrupted. We become resistant to succumbing to sorrow when we witness things that hurt our hearts. We become resistant to running with fear, but instead stand firm with courage. When we hear stories about people who overcome a disappointment, moved rather than be stilled by sorrow, or stand firm when we're frightened, we are inspired to pull from ourselves those same abilities. Today's show is going to be a conversation about resistance and stories of resistance. I'll be joined by my co-host, David Hutchens, and we will not have a guest. Guess what? No guest, just a co-host. So this is going to be a conversation. I know you're saying, Madelyn, your shows are always a conversation. But today, it will be a little different. David will challenge me as much as I challenge him with questions and ideas. And with that as background, let me introduce to you David Hutchens. Hello, David.
Woo-hoo-hoo. What a great introduction. Wow. Thank you, Dr. Blair. Lovely.
Oh, please call me Madelyn.
No, I'm a co-host. I get to do what I want.
Oh, excuse me. You know, I have to introduce you to my audience a little bit, and maybe in a different way than I have in the past, because this is a return to Unlocked for you. David and I met 15 years ago. I had just lost my mother, And we were in a little exercise at a conference where we were sharing personal stories. And of course, what was on my mind was the fact that I just lost my mother. And David listened to that story with such heart that we've been friends ever since. That's all I can say. But in addition, David does a few other things. He works with executives to help them get in touch with their hearts as well through story. And he's written a lot of great books, including my very favorite, The Circle of the Nine Muses. David, I know I can say more about you, but you just add if you want to.
That is lovely. And isn't that wild that we remember that story session from 15 years ago? That
Right.
is 15 years ago. I remember it too. I remember where I was sitting. I don't remember the details of what I said. I remember your story. And the other thing I remember is what it felt like.
Yes.
Right? It makes that emotional imprint. And so 15 years later, I remember what it felt like to be sitting there with you. How astonishing is that? So since I'm a co-host, I get to introduce you as well.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we'll pretend like your audience doesn't know you.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat today because Madelyn Blair is one of the brilliant and warm-hearted thinkers in the story space. We have been friends for well over a decade, and even before we became friends, she has been a pioneer in the practice of storytelling in organizational contexts. She was I think you were one of the founding members of the Golden Fleece,
Yeah.
right? Which is a legendary story organization from many years ago. That was actually before my time. I wasn't even part of Golden Fleece.
Yeah.
Madelyn has since been recognized by the organization Stone Register of New York for her lifetime achievement in the art and application of storytelling for organizations.
Yeah.
So she is a giant, and we are fortunate to have her in our conversation today.
Oh, David, thank
How
you.
about that?
That
I
is,
just made that up.
that is such a treat. Thank you so much. Well, let's get on to the content here. You know, you were the one who introduced the idea of resistance stories. What inspired you to do it, and what's the story?
Yeah, so when Madelyn talks about resistance stories and that phrase that actually manifested as an online program, it was just last week where we invited in government workers and academic thinkers and DEI practitioners and researchers to come in and tell their stories of resistance about how this current administration here in the United States has either compromised or disrupted their work. And so where it came from, Madelyn, is, like a lot of people, I've been feeling anxious because I don't like what's happening in our country right now. I've been saying, what can I do? What can I do? And I know a lot of people have been saying that. And a lot of people say, call your representative. Okay, good. I did that. What else can I do? And I was at lunch. My wife and I were at lunch with one of our dear friends. She is a professor at a university, an esteemed university here in Nashville, Tennessee, where I live. And our friend is one of the world's experts in a really specific topic. She is an authority in how preschool-aged children develop empathy. And she goes all around the world lecturing on this specific topic.
Was it Michelle Borba?
What's that?
Was it Michelle Borba?
No, it's not her.
Okay.
And I don't have permission to tell her story, so I'm not going to say her name, but it's not.
All right.
And so our friend was at lunch almost in tears, telling us that her lifetime of work, which was over 300 papers, academic papers, has been removed from the university website because the papers contained words in them like diverse, referring to children's learning styles, or transition, referring to kids transitioning from kindergarten into first grade, or include, once again referring to kids. But because her papers, 300 papers, are loaded with these words that have been deemed unacceptable by the current administration, her lifetime's work has been deleted. And she is crushed by that. And I remember saying to her, you have to tell people what happened. The world has to hear this. And as I was telling her that, that's when, if there was a bell in my head that you could hear, you would have heard ding. I got, this is what I can do, right? There's not much in the world I know how to do. I told my wife, the Christmas song, Little Drummer Boy. I don't have a gift to bring to the baby, but I can play my drum, so I'll do that. I feel like that's what I have. I can help people tell stories as an act of resistance. So that's the moment the idea was born, and it culminated in this wonderful experience that you were a part of that was Resistance Stories.
Wow. As you were saying that, I was thinking about how I explored that word resistance in the opening for the show. And I could just see, just telling that story must have been for her an opportunity to remember, but to help you to remember that she did something substantive. Yeah.
Well, I think you're making a really interesting point, and so I want to ask you a question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm co-host, right? I get to do. So the question is, so why stories? Creating this opportunity for people to resist. And what you and I are saying is, we think this unique language that is narrative has something to do with that. Why stories, Madelyn?
Well, there are many reasons. But when we tell a story, and we tell it as a story, the listener has the opportunity to say, well, this is a story, so let me just at least listen to the story. I can judge it later on, but for now, I will listen to it. And it's not that we lose judgment, it's that we suspend it while we listen to the story.
Right.
And because we've suspended it, we're able to bring on more insights and more data. And it's a richer experience. It's a different kind of thinking. I'll give you an example. If you go to a lecture and the person opens with a story, they've got you. They've got you hooked because you've opened your mind to what they have to say. If they began with enumerating the theories that he's going to talk about, et cetera, you may listen to a little bit of it. But in a way, it's almost too much, and so you would turn it off. So the key first is that you open yourself to it. The second reason that story is so powerful, and a great, I'll call it a great vehicle, not a tool, a vehicle,
right,
is that when you hear a story, I'm listening to your story of this woman who had written 300 papers. I'm thinking to myself, I worked on 600 projects. Have I lost all those 600? So suddenly I was inside her story. Her story was inside me. I was relating to it.
Like it was happening to you at some level.
Exactly. And so there is a second reason why story works so powerfully, is that you actually begin to be a part of it. So I don't know. I think I'm going to stop there because those are two really important reasons why story works.
Yeah. The why story conversation, we can go deep into that, right? And so I'll tag on to that the opposite. Because after we had publicized this idea of we're hosting this free session where you can tell your resistance stories, I got a call from a lady here in Nashville who's on the Nashville City Council. So she's in local government. And so she was saying, I'm interested in how can I bring the entire city council to this. So we were talking and just exploring. And I said, so tell me why you connect to this. And she started telling me, quote, her story. And she was saying stuff like, the people of Nashville don't know what's about to hit them. We're about to lose $100 million in funding to our city. And then she goes, technically, okay, not funding, but you have to understand there's unrestricted funds and then there's restricted funds. and set that aside because there's also grants. And she started talking, and I just started doing this, going, ugh, you've already lost me. I don't know what you're saying. And I felt like she was giving me stuff to disagree with. When you lead with, $100 million, where'd you get that number? I heard it was $20 million, right? So the suspension of judgment you just described, when somebody leads with data or isms and philosophies, that invites judgment. Now you're inviting disagreement. Uh, and so that was just another illustration. There's my friend who told this story about her work at the university. I was like, yes, more of that. My friend whose first instinct is to lead with data, no, not that. And that's what I see everybody doing. And so if we can invite people to make this shift to more human kind of language, I think we're in a much better conversation,
Definitely. Oh, wow. Okay. I'll stop thinking and start talking. People want to hear something. You talked about having this event where we gave a certain number of people the opportunity to talk about their moments when they felt they needed to resist or were being pushed uncomfortably. I was thinking about that myself in terms of how did I feel while I was participating in that. Now, I was participating as one of the coaches. You were participating as the host. So I'm going to ask the questions of you too. But I asked myself the question, how did I feel listening to some of those stories? And there was a mix of disappointment that they had to suffer because they were describing places where they were suffering. And then I felt a sense of admiration that here they were telling me about this sensitive thing, knowing that they didn't necessarily have the answer to resolve it. And so that's what was in my mind. But how did you feel during that experience?
What was surprising to me as well was, as a host facilitator of the event, how much I needed this. Because I was kind of showing up to serve and help usher forth stories, and then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm hurting too. I'm also wounded. I need my friends right now. And it was really a beautiful conversation. One of the things that surprised me about the conversation is how much joy there was.
Yes.
And like some people, their work that was disrupted is delivering aid to the Congo.
That's right.
Kids are definitely dying, right? And so to say that there was joy in this conversation as we were bringing forward our grief sounds kind of like a paradox, but it's true. There was love in the space, and it was our dear friend Mary Alice Arthur, who is one of the facilitators and one of the great story thinkers.
Oh, fabulous.
And she said, the more we show up with joy, the less controllable we will be.
Oh, I remember that phrase.
I loved that phrase, and I wrote it down, and I thought that's a movement that I would sign up for.
Yeah. Well, what we were seeing in those moments of distress was our humanness to respond. And so there is a joy in seeing humanity. Yeah.
And that's the beauty of this. We did not name, I don't remember ever hearing the name of any political parties.
No.
And you and I haven't done that either. I mean, I think people can put the pieces together, but that's not what we're doing. That the invitation is to drop the isms and drop the labels and recognize we have different ideas, but we're neighbors. Yeah. And our neighbors are hurting and we are hurting. And the opportunity is to drop the isms and look each other in the eyes and say, tell me what you experienced.
Yeah. And we also experience these things in other arenas. I mean, it doesn't just have to be this particular situation, political situation, whatever. In fact, I've already been thinking about, okay, Madelyn, when have you experienced this feeling of resisting something that was coming at you, and realized it had nothing to do with the political situation. In fact, it happened 20 years ago. And I said, okay, then these are legitimate things to do. Think about those moments, because it reminds me a lot of my own work in resilience. When you understand what you have been able to be resilient through, it says to you and reminds you how strong you really are, and you get stronger and stronger.
In a way, we were kind of telling stories to ourselves for ourselves. We're a group of friends trying to help ourselves, and that's exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're talking about responding to forces in the world in an act of resistance, and we're saying that story is a part of that. Madelyn, how can we bring this forward? How can how can others explore their own resistance stories as well as those of others? Like if somebody is listening to this going, wow, that sounds really cool what you did. I'd like to be a part of something like that. How can other people step into this space?
Well, I think I was I was beginning to answer that question myself by just going through my own life. When have I met those kinds of situations? And I will tell you the story. I was in a class and I was being taught about how you're supposed to listen. It's an important skill, especially for a manager. If you want to be a good manager, you've got to know how to listen to people. And one of the exercises was to have, I think it was a group of 3 or 4 people, and one person talked. They could tell a story, they could talk about anything they wanted. But while they were talking, in one of the exercises, we were supposed to ignore that person. Literally. Some people just turned away. Other people, kind of went like this. We never asked them questions, nothing. And as I'm sitting in that particular moment, and I'm watching this person, their face just began to crumble. Their voice became softer and softer. And I said, this is terrible. This is one of those cases that I talked about where it hurts my heart to just watch it. I can't be a witness to this anymore. And if I said, I'm not doing this anymore, we're not doing this anymore, stop. Let me tell you, this is what I heard you say. And I made sure this person knew that I had heard everything they said.
You rebelled against the design.
I did.
Understand. I hate this design. I'm not doing it.
Exactly.
I love it.
And I thought to myself, well, dang, how cool to be reminded to think about those situations.
That makes me think of that. There's that famous experiment. They don't even do it anymore because of the ethical implications. Where, have you seen this? There's videos where they'll take a mother and the newborn baby. You know how you hold your baby? Oh, there's your baby, right? And they instructed the mother, just go dead in your face. Give the baby nothing.
Ooh.
And they show the baby start to get distressed. And then the baby starts crying because the baby's dying for something from mommy. And after a while, the moms do what you did. Like, I can't participate in this anymore. But it's almost this act of cruelty. And so from birth, we are built to connect with each other. And it doesn't end when we're babies. You and I need this right now. I need to look you in the eye, and I need to laugh when you laugh. And there's a term for this, neuroception. We're connecting at a neurological level. It exists beyond our conscious awareness. And if that doesn't happen, we feel not seen and not heard. And it's distressing. And I think another answer to the why story question is story gets you to that deep human connection really, really fast.
It really does. I want to go, excuse me. I want to go back to our experience of this event that you put together. And I'm thinking about the stories that I heard because they were very simple stories. Uh, nobody took, 10 minutes to tell this story. They took just a couple of minutes. Was there one of the stories, obviously you can't reveal the person, but was there one story that really touched you?
Well, since I was the host, I actually did not go into one of the breakouts. So I didn't get to have that part of the experience. Do you mind if I turn that question?
Defer.
Mhm.
Okay. I think that's reasonable. Now I have to think. See, I was going to put that question on you, but now I
Uh,
have to think about the question.
well, while you're thinking, I can tell you that as as people were reaching out and I was kind of vetting them for are you a good fit for this session, I did get glimpses of their stories. And what surprised me was how deep the pain was.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these are government workers, to get laid off is horrible. But not only were they laid off, they experienced trauma and chaos before they were laid off. And one thing we know from a current administrator of the office of the budget, there's actually a recording of him saying, "We want to cause trauma for our federal employees," and that's what's happening. And so one person told me, I would like to bring my entire team to this. My team is so freaked out right now, they can't even talk about what happened. So they're
Wow.
not even candidates for this session. They're not ready to tell their story. So, there's telling the story as
Interesting.
an act of resistance.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the changes to the design that I did as I was talking to people is some people aren't ready to tell their stories. We need to create space just for them to
Yeah.
process their story. And
Well,
that's why we had Dr. David Drake
that's right.
hosting a separate breakout room for people who are saying, I just need to talk about what happened, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I forgot about David, the other David.
The other David. Yeah.
Okay. I remember the story, and it's a good
Okay.
one
Okay.
because it's a positive one. Positive in that it turned. It turned. This was a young woman who had been doing a very credible job, had been praised in her work, and I think it was a new manager came in. Anyway, there was a slight change of personnel, and at the next meeting, they were supposed to talk about the project that the storyteller was a part of, but she couldn't tell the story. It had to be done by this other person who had been brought in. And she was really disturbed because she had always talked about what she did and got very positive feedback. And why couldn't she say it this time? Well,
Wow.
you'll love this. She she does a little back channeling work. Before the next meeting, she talks to the person who worked with her on the same project, and she said, "Let's go over to him and suggest to him that we present it together." And of course, this person said, "Of course, you're a part of the project." And so when the next meeting did come around, all three of them presented the story. And the big boss, who had made this edict that only this one person could speak, suddenly couldn't not let them speak. And I just thought it was brilliant.
Wow. You know, it, even that first part of a boss making a decision about who can and can't tell their own story.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like an act of violence to tell someone I'm taking your story away from you. Somebody else will tell your story
Right.
for you. There's that quote that's been attributed to Marshall Gans of the Harvard story movement, which is that story is the currency of power and oppression.
Wow.
Story is the currency of power and oppression. So we see, especially in authoritarian movements, one of the first steps in an authoritarian movement is to control who gets to tell their story, whose story gets amplified, whose story gets put on the front page of the newspaper, whose story gets suppressed. You're silenced. You sit over there. We're not listening to your story. These are all power moves, and they're the first move of the authoritarian and the fascist.
I didn't know that. You.
Story is the currency of power and oppression.
Power and oppression. It's interesting. It's the currency there.
And yeah, there's an exchange that happens, right?
Yeah. Ah. Okay. Now, let's now come back to what you were getting at. How can we get others to really explore their own resistance stories? And, how does that form no, I won't say any more than that. How can we get others to explore their own stories?
You and I are both in the business of helping leaders tell stories and work with their stories, right? What I encounter, a lot of people who do story work will jump straight to, here's how to tell a good story. You need conflict, you need a protagonist. Good, that's a good conversation. In my work, I find that people get stuck long before we get to that conversation. People say, which story should I tell?
Yeah.
And they don't know. And that's why I have resources, in my program. One that I use that's real popular is this. It's called the Leadership Story Deck. It's what it sounds like. It's a deck of cards with lots of ideas of stories that you have that you could be telling.
Pull one out as an example.
So when I open the box, card number 1 is called A Leader with Conviction. There's a reason I'm here. That's a great story. There's a reason it's the first card in the deck. It's really a flexible story. Every time you have a new project, that's a chance to tell a personal story that says, let me tell you why I care about this thing.
Yeah.
There's something that brings me to this thing. So that's one example of what it can look like. For resistance stories, there's some cards in the deck that match what we were trying to do, but I found that we needed a different taxonomy. And so one simple resource, and I'll share this with your listeners, if they'll reach out to me either on LinkedIn or email, we can put that in the show notes, right?
We'll put it on the show notes. Yep.
Yeah, I'll send this resource. This is for people who are saying, I don't know what resistance stories to tell. You have thousands that you could choose from. Here's 3 to get you started. One is called Impact Interrupted. That's the one of my friend who is the researcher at the university. I was doing this work, and then one day I came in and all my papers were deleted, right? Tell us the story of the good work you were doing in the world and the impact that it was having, and now it's gone. And that gives your audience an opportunity to say, that's messed up. I want that good work that you were doing to continue. Right. So now we've created an opportunity for solidarity with the audience. The second one on here is called Witness to Harm. So I was there in my office, and the new boss came in, and he said, you can't tell your story in the presentation. Right. So if there's things that are happening that are wrong, we need to hear you say that. Tell us what happened. Let us see and feel the impact of that. The third one on here is called I Stand by My Values. And I got the idea for this one when this is a story that kind of has broken through the noise a little bit. A lot of people have heard it, but there's a 6th grade teacher in Idaho who had a poster in her classroom with multicolored ethnic hands raising their hands, and it said, everyone is welcome here. And a school administrator came and said, you have to take that poster down because that's a personal belief, and it's against our policy to have personal beliefs. And she's like, that's not a personal belief. It's been there for 3 years. And he's like, well, it's a personal belief now. And she refused to take it down. This was like her act of rebellion. And she's like, I'm not going to take it down. I care about the kids. I'm standing, right? So that's the I stand in my values story. I resisted by not giving in. And maybe I prevailed, or maybe I suffered consequences. That teacher hasn't been fired yet, but she doesn't know what's going to happen. But tell the story of standing in your values and what that does. And several people commented on this in the resistance story session. It's just all of our voices coming together. We all found this courage. If there's any part of us that was afraid to speak out or say something on social media because our crazy uncle would just say something terrible to us, or right? A lot of us feel this. Oh, I hope it's okay to say something, and to hear people tell these stories emboldened all of us. And we were all able to say, we have to exercise our voices.
You know, you said something earlier that people don't know. What story should I tell? I don't have any stories. And oftentimes when I'm working with people in story, that is one of the first things they say, because they've never been asked the question before to actually tell a personal story. And I say to them, don't worry. When you listen to 2 or 3 other stories, you'll have so many stories of your own that will come up.
Yeah.
And invariably, that's what happens. And
Oh,
in fact, they have more stories than they have time to tell.
yeah.
So
I always find that the person who volunteers to go first feels the most awkward. They're the ones who go, ooh, I don't know. I guess I'll tell us, right? They feel awkward. But after that, it's exactly what you just said.
yeah. Hmm. So what that says to me is that these kinds of stories have to be heard by people, so in some way, so that it stimulates the memory, so that you can say, I do remember when I was in that class and I didn't like that exercise. I didn't think of myself as a resistance person, but there I was. I did it. So maybe next time I can do it again. How do we do that? What do you think, David?
We do have a few minutes left, right?
We do.
Okay.
We do.
That's kind of the question, because we came together for this event, and it was powerful and painful and joyful, and you and others were incredibly generous and didn't take any payment for this. It's all volunteer, because we agreed that this was important. That's the space I'm in now, which is what needs to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we bring this forward? The obvious first answer is, every seat was filled in the program. I turned people away. So I do have a list of more people who are saying, I want to do this. So running the session again, that's one good way forward. Mm-hmm. But I've been reflecting on that too, Madelyn, of what does need to happen next. That was such a special, rich, vital conversation that I think we all have the sense of this has to keep happening. So one is design it and issue an invitation and host it and all those things that we just did. Do you have any other thoughts beyond that of what could happen to keep this conversation going?
I don't know how to do it, but it would be, I think it's the kind of conversation that could be localized, I'll call it. In other words, your example of the woman in whatever the town was that was going to lose $20 million.
That's my town, Nashville.
Okay. Nashville. By the way, I'm going to Chattanooga in May. I haven't spent any time in Tennessee, so finally I'm going to spend a few days.
It's a really pretty city. You're going to enjoy it.
Good. Anyway, I'm thinking that's the kind of exercise, I'll call it an exercise for want of a better word, that if local communities knew how to do this, and it's not that you are asking them to, I hope that it has not come across that you have to be thinking this way in order to be able to take advantage of this. I think anyone and everyone can take advantage of and benefit from hearing these kinds of stories from each other. So it can go to a town in I'll call it Western New York, or it can go to one in North Dakota or Texas, and it would become a tool that can be used to help the community understand that it's like grieving. This thing is like grieving. There's a pain there, and how do we help each other grieve? Okay, I'll stop there. I'm starting to think wild.
So I'm building on what you just said. There's this almost quaint image of America, but it really is something we've lost, where we used to go out in our front yard and our neighbors would be standing out there. We'd be holding our coffee cups and we would just talk to each other in the driveway.
Yeah.
or over the fence in the backyard. And now it's social media, and we're more disconnected than we've ever been. And that neuroception that I was talking about on social media, there's like a filter, a veil that dampens that neuroception. And so we're trying to connect with each other, but in the comments on a Facebook post, it doesn't happen the same way. And that's why people start being jerks to each other, who if we were talking to each other in the driveway, there's no way we would say the awful stuff that we say to each other on Facebook. It's because that neuroception is broken. And so I think part of the remedy is to go outside and find opportunities to face your friends and face your neighbors and look each other in the eye, and don't talk about philosophies, and don't talk about isms, and don't plant a flag, literal or metaphorical, in your front yard, and instead say, tell me what happened. What did you experience? And let me tell you what happened to me. And now we're community again. And now we're one people, joined by experience and joined by story.
Hmm.
And I think that's something sacred that has been lost. And this age is calling out for us to bring it back.
Hmm. It still comes back to the question of how do we get that into people's hands? Because to have something like this, you have to feel a confidence that what you're about to do has I want to call it a structure, because we like structure. We know when we start, we know when we end. Am I getting too far?
No, because this is what you and I do. We design and host these events, these occasions where this can happen. But one of the paradoxes of story work is, yes, it can be very intentional, and it's a skill, and it's an art form, and you can spend the rest of your life getting better and better at it, right? Yes, all of that is true. And this is also the dinner table phenomenon, where when you bring friends together, or if we're having a glass of wine, or if we're just standing in a circle, you don't have to tell people to tell stories. It just happens. This is the operating system that already lives in our brains. So yes, I'm all for creating well hosted events. That's what we do for a living. It doesn't have to be that. It can be just looking each other in the eye and saying, let me tell you what happened to me. What happened to you? And people know how to have that conversation. They don't need training to have that conversation. Doing that since we were young little children.
Yeah, that's true. 5-year-olds can do this in a flash.
Yeah.
And without any embarrassment or difficulty. Well, as you were talking, though, I thought to myself, you still have to, I'm thinking in terms of how do you convey this? And I realized, maybe churches are an avenue of, I'm just thinking about ways in which you can actually send out, this is an idea for you to consider. So churches is what came to my mind. Even though they are in decline, it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, I know a lot of churches that are split right now over the isms, and they're having a really hard time with this conversation. You're right. A church seems like a really good place to put a bunch of chairs in a circle, facing each other, and talk to each other in a different way. That does seem like it should be a natural place for this conversation.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm thinking about my audience. I mean, we have thousands of people who are watching us. So I'm going to invite them. If you have an idea about how the idea that David and I have been talking about, how we can promote this, distribute it, support it, let us know. Just send an email to me, Madelyn at madelyn@madelynblair.com. Very simple. It's on the screen, so you know even how to spell it. And send me your ideas. I'll put them up on the show notes as they come in, and I'll share them with David.
Well, and just think, if all of the people that are watching and listening to this, what if each one of them told one of these? right? And it, I mean, the lady who sends aid to the Congo and keeps children alive, that's pretty dramatic. You might be saying, I don't do anything like that. Okay, tell us about your mom who's struggling to get her Social Security check because she can't get anybody on the phone right now.
Yeah.
That's a story worth telling right now. You know?
Oh, David, I like that. That's a very nice, simple, actionable step that people can take. And
If 1,000 of your listeners
yeah,
told a story, that's
yeah,
impact.
that's impact. You're right. Fabulous. Well, we came upon several ideas, one of which I think is actually doable. That's great. Well, David, I know we've come to the end of what we thought we would talk about. Is there anything else that you feel we need to just convey to my audience?
Yeah. As if you're listening to this, and if you're one of the people who's saying, I don't know what to do, I feel helpless, know that you have more power than you realize. This language that is story is powerful language, and it's language that you already possess. You're already doing this. You don't have to be a master presenter. Just tell us what happened. And one question that I get a lot in my work is, as we're telling stories and talking about influence and how to shift the system, even before this administration, sometimes people would say, how does this work in politics? Because politics, there's these massive campaigns that they're pouring billions of dollars into, and I don't know what to do about that. And I tell people, you know what? I don't know either. Because when there are systems and entities that have enough money to buy a giant megaphone that can drown out everything else, I don't have a messaging strategy to combat that. Sometimes I just can't buy a megaphone that big. But what you do have is your stories. And if you remember the parable of Goliath, and how David picked up stones from the creek and put them in a sling. And sometimes a single stone is all it takes to bring down the giant system. And stories are the stones in the sling. You have more power than you know. Keep telling your stories. You don't have to measure impact. Just tell the stories. Some of those are going to break through.
David Hutchens, thank you so much for just joining me on this conversation.
Yeah, we're a good team. We should do this some more.
We should do it more often. I agree. Well, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time, but thank you so much.
Wow, that was fast.
It did go fast, yes. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Madelyn.
Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. Well, I wish I could have continued with David, but I know that we have to round this out. And when I show you the book, you're going to say, "Oh, not that book again!" But it's one of my favorites. It's the 50 Lessons from Frank Lloyd Wright. This lesson is called Designed for Resilience. And I think it's just perfect for what David and I have been talking about. In it, it says, one of the great triumphs of Frank Lloyd Wright's career was the manner in which the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, which he designed in 1916, survived the 1923 earthquake there with very little damage, even as the other structures crumbled all around its intersecting planes and low-slung volumes. That's part of what they talked about here in this particular lesson. Now, Wright was not an expert in designing and building for earthquakes, but he was a student of the architecture that had withstood time in an area that is prone to earthquakes, and what had seemed to be the reason they could withstand the tremor. So he could look at them and say, I see this across them all. What was it that helped them withstand this? In Japan, those buildings, which were older, tended to be very low. They also tended to be woven together with both horizontal and vertical walls that intersected each other. And as a result, the walls themselves embraced each other as the earth moved, allowing enormous vibrations to pass through the building, even to the point of moving, yet never destroying the building. I immediately had in my mind, if you ever bought a crate of, say, wine, and in between each bottle, there's a little bit of cardboard that goes between, and they're woven together in each direction, and it keeps the bottle straight. Well, anyway, as I think about that and how Wright's architecture allowed that hotel to survive when there was such destruction all around it, it said to me that within that structure, they were built so that small shakes were allowed enough to give flexibility to the building without destroying the basic structure. And the more I thought about the resistance stories that we have heard, what we saw were small examples where a disappointment or fear was accepted, but in the end, it did not disturb the peace of the person. Now, David and I didn't talk about that particular aspect of the resistance stories. But when I thought about Frank Lloyd Wright's lesson, it came to me. Can these small stories, these small resistance stories, can they help us keep peace within ourselves? The people who tell those stories were determined that they would move on. They would determine that they would retain who they were. It might be that they would return to something that didn't work out in the past, but they would do something different in the future. Or perhaps it was that they would be ready to state their opinion when asked rather than assume all would be well if they remained silent. It was those small stories that allowed me to see that the whole structure of our culture could retain its values and sense of who it really is by never letting those small things become enough to destroy the essence. I'm always astounded at the lessons I learned from Frank Lloyd Wright. That's why I keep going back to that book again and again. Perhaps it's more than his wisdom. Perhaps it's that he just allows me to see things from a new perspective. Just like someone's story can help me see things from a new perspective. My conclusion is that once again, when I see something or experience something that I feel is inconsistent with my set of values or my perception of the world, of what's good and right and what's generative, then I will not let it break through things in me. It might feel very uncomfortable, but I want to make sure that those things which make me who I am are never in mortal danger of being lost. 50 Lessons to Learn from Frank Lloyd Wright by Aaron Betsky and Gideon Fink Shapiro. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. I love interacting with you, hearing what you are thinking about or concerned with. And the best way to get on my mailing list, by the way, is by registering on the contact page of my website, madelynblair.com. I never share my mailing list with anyone, and I send out no more than one email a week. Promise. And if you're on YouTube, please click the like button. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe. This helps me, and it helps others who are looking for similar information. And remember that we're going to put additional pieces of information in the notes under the show on my YouTube channel, so you can go there and see how you can get in touch with David and get his wonderful deck of cards, or just that plain sheet. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.